More on the modern money mechanics. Part 2. What limits the amount of money banks can create? This is what I want you to hear, folks. We are now to serious points. I hope you understood what was going on earlier. You put your money in a bank, and a bank only has to hold a certain portion of that money. They can then loan out money on that, but money that you don't even have, that they don't even have, okay? And they're charging you a fee. What limits the amount of money banks can create? Sit back, folks, and listen to this. And again, I'm going to put the link up here. If deposit money can be created so easily, what is to prevent banks from making too much, more than sufficient to keep the nation's productive resources fully employed without price inflation? Like its predecessor, the modern bank must keep available to make payments on demand a considerable amount of currency and funds on deposit with the central bank. The bank must be prepared to convert deposit money into currency for those depositors who request currency. It must make remittance on checks written by depositors and present for payment by other bank, in parentheses, settle adverse clearings. Finally, it must maintain legally required reserves in the form of vault cash and or balances as its Federal Reserve Bank equal to the prescribed percentage of its deposits. It will go on here to say possibly 10%. The public's demand for currency varies greatly, but generally follows a seasonal pattern that is quite predictable. The effects on bank funds of these variations in the amount of currency held by the public usually are offset by the central bank, which replaces the reserves absorbed by currency withdrawals from banks. Now we're in parentheses again. Just how this is done will be explained later. Okay. For all banks taken together, there is no net drain of funds through clearings. A check drawn on one bank normally will be deposited to the credit of another account. If not in the same bank, then in some other bank. These operating needs influence the minimum amount of reserves an individual bank will hold voluntarily. However, as long as this minimum amount is less than what is legally required, operating needs are relatively minor importance as a restraint on aggressive deposit expansion in the banking system. Such expansion cannot continue beyond the point where the amount of reserves that all banks have is just significant to satisfy legal requirements under our quotations, fractional reserve system. For example, if reserves of 20% are required, deposits could expand only until they were 5 times as large as reserves. Reserves of $10 million could support deposits of $50 million. What they just said, folks, if there's $50 million in the bank, they can create another $10 million on top of that. The lower the percentage, no, they only have to hold $10 million. The lower the percentage requirement, the greater the deposit expansion that can be supported by such additional reserve dollar. Thus, the legal reserve ratio, together with the dollar amount of a bank reserves, are factors that set the upper limit to money creation. I'm at 4 minutes. What are bank reserves? Currently held in bank vaults may be counted as legal reserves as well as deposits, parentheses, reserve balances, at the Federal Reserve banks. Both are equally acceptable in satisfaction of reserve requirements. A bank can always obtain reserve balances by sending currency to its reserve bank and can obtain currency by withdrawing on its reserve balance, because either can be used to support a much larger volume of deposit liabilities of banks. Currency in circulation and reserve balances together are often referred to as, quotations, high-powered money, are the, quotations again, monetary base. Reserve balances and vault cash in banks, however, are not counted as part of the money stock held by the public. For individual banks, reserve accounts also serve as working balances. Banks may increase the balances in their reserve accounts by depositing checks and proceeds from electronic fund transfers, as well as currency. Or they may draw down these balances by writing checks on them, or by authorizing a debt or debit to them in payment for currency, customers' checks, and other fund transfers. Although reserve accounts are used as working balances, each bank must maintain, on the average, for the relevant reserve maintenance period, reserve balances at their reserve bank and vault cash, which together are equal to the required reserves as determined by the amount of deposits in the reserve computation period. Let's see where I'm at. Folks, I want you to download this. I want you to read it and understand how our money works. You don't know how it works. There's so many things in here. This is a, let's go all the way up to it. It's about a 50-page document. I want you to read it. It explains everything. Who creates money? How much money a bank can create. And you notice it said how much money a bank can create. So you put some money in the bank only has to hold, okay, here we go. As a result of the process so far, total assets and total liabilities, all banks held together, risen 19,000. Reserves with FR banks 10, loans 9,000, total 19,000. And that's on a $10,000 deposit. Okay, excess reserves have been reduced. The amount. Okay, just take my word for it. I'm gonna put the link up here on this. I want you to download this PDF file. I want you to read it. I want you to understand it. The Federal Reserve Bank does not want you to understand this. They don't want you to read it. They don't want you to know what's going on. And you notice, where they talked about you put your money in the bank, you put your gold in the bank, and then they give you a receipt, and you could then trade that receipt for the actual metal, gold and silver. We're not backed by gold and silver anymore, folks. We're backed by more dollars. A Federal Reserve note is good, and you can redeem a Federal Reserve dollar at the bank for another Federal Reserve note. All right, I'm done with these two videos. I'm going to post them, and I'm going to put the link up there. So, talk to you later, folks. Know what money does, folks. Know what it does. Legend of Rio. About $5. Talk to you later.